Welcome to the Containment Zone. There is a house in rural Pennsylvania that no longer appears on any maps. You won't find it on satellite imagery, and no road signs mention its location. But if you ask the locals, quietly, in the right tavern, on the wrong kind of night, they might mention the old McMillan property. They'll say it burned down. They'll say it collapsed. They'll say it's not there anymore. They are wrong. The house still stands, but the house does not end. It began, as many things do, with something small, a door. On May 20th, 1983, Foundation agents embedded in Greene County received word of a structure behaving abnormally, a farmhouse with inconsistent dimensions. Visitors reported vertigo, disorientation, and a sensation described in one report as being swallowed by the wallpaper. All testimonies, even from unrelated individuals, noted one singular architectural feature, a second-floor door at the end of a hallway facing east. A door that always seemed just slightly ajar. A door that no one remembered installing. Initial reconnaissance deployed a low-risk D-class team outfitted with body cams, audio recorders, and locational tethers. The results were inconclusive. The cameras failed upon passing the threshold of the door. Audio degraded into static. GPS signals vanished. Only one agent returned. He was missing his eyes. He had no wounds, no blood, just empty sockets, clean and dry, as if scooped away by a surgical wind. He could not speak, but he kept pointing toward the farmhouse, over and over, until he collapsed from dehydration. The door, as far as anyone could tell, led nowhere, but it had depth, it had presence, and it called. Containment protocols were initiated. The house was surrounded by a triple perimeter electric fence and declared off-limits to all civilian traffic. Reality anchors were installed, though readings remained inconclusive. The structure resisted mapping. Its hallways elongated, rooms duplicated and sometimes inverted. One field technician wrote, "It's like the house is remembering itself differently each day." Then came the first attack. At 2001 on June 3rd, surveillance recorded figures exiting the door. Human-shaped, but not human. They moved with erratic twitching motions, limbs at inconsistent angles. Their eyes glowed a soft, predatory white. They did not scream. They simply charged. 2 guards were lost, weapons ineffective. When struck, the entities collapsed into clouds of black particulate matter, dissipating into the air like burnt ash. Within minutes, the area was silent again. The door had closed. Subsequent analysis identified the anomaly as SCP-1983, subdivided into 2 key elements, SCP-1983-1, the structure itself and the impossible door, and SCP-1983, but labeling the parts of a wound does not heal it, and the house was still breathing. Rooms began shifting even without entry. Personnel stationed nearby reported migraines, hallucinations, and the urge to walk toward the structure, even while sleeping. One researcher was found sleepwalking into the electrified perimeter. When asked why, he simply said, "I thought I left something open." This has become the dominant theory, that SCP-1983 is not a location but a leak, a fracture in dimensional logic disguised as a building, a dream trying to remember its origin, or perhaps a place that was never meant to exist, still insisting on its right to do so. The Foundation doubled its efforts. Observation drones were deployed. Linguistic matrices were applied to audio distortion patterns. One translation attempt resulted in the following phrase, emerging from the static: "We did not mean to leave it open." And then, just before the drone signal died, it recorded one final image, a hallway. Endless. And at the end, the door, still ajar. The Foundation's first mistake was assuming the house could be sealed, that it responded to locks and rules, that something rooted in memory could be contained with concrete and proximity sensors. The second mistake came weeks later, when the house began opening itself. On the morning of July 14th, an automated alert triggered Site-73's response team. Perimeter cameras had caught nothing, but something had broken through the innermost layer where no life should have crossed. The readings from the temporal scanners were erratic. Waves of chronological desynchronization pulsed outward from the building like heat shimmers across asphalt. Clocks refused to agree. Radios played phrases from transmissions never sent. The air, according to one technician, had a taste like flickering aluminum. There was no sign of breach entry, and yet the door had shifted. A new agent, Field Operative Thorne was tasked with a secondary scouting procedure, this time assisted by a prototype audiovisual tether reinforced by nonlinear dampeners. His transmission fed directly into the Site Command Core for 27 uninterrupted minutes, and then, very quietly, it began to diverge. In the footage, Thorne walked through a corridor with floral wallpaper. That same corridor appeared 7 times. The patterns mutated. The floor swelled beneath his boots, and the walls rippled as if beneath a thin layer of liquid. One light fixture swung gently, though there was no wind. At timestamp 00:01:32, Thorne whispered into the mic, "There's no end to it. It folds back in. The house isn't repeating, it's remembering itself wrong." Then the camera froze, but the audio did not. At 00:01:14:6, a whisper, not Thorne's, entered the channel. It was never meant to be open. No one in the command room moved. The voice had no identifiable accent, no human modulation. It was more like the memory of a voice, something that had been heard once and never spoken aloud again. At 00:01:1948, Thorne's voice resumed, but reversed. Playing the sound forward only produced static, followed by a low chime, like a doorbell in a flooded house. He never returned. A retrieval unit was dispatched, armed and surgically timed, to extract within 3 minutes of threshold crossing. They made it 67 seconds in before withdrawing in full retreat. All 5 members reported the same visual distortion, a figure standing behind them, reflected in every window, even those that had not been there seconds earlier. What made this terrifying wasn't the figure itself, but its stillness. It never moved, it never changed, it simply watched. They described its face as being made of places I remember, but not faces I know. It mirrored grief, it mirrored comfort, it mirrored the shape of someone who could have helped them, if only they remembered who. Each of them would later be diagnosed with mild dissociative episodes, insomnia, and a recurring compulsion to draw spirals. The curls always began clockwise, always enclosed nothing, always appeared in multiples of 13. Dr. Malik, the on-site psychological overseer, coined the term resonant architecture syndrome to describe the phenomenon. She hypothesized that the house may not simply deform space, but embed itself inside memory, nesting within the frameworks of spatial awareness, bending internal and external structure into one. Her words, "It's not haunted, it's inhabiting." But nothing she said prepared the team for what happened next. On August 2nd, a test was conducted involving a low-frequency pulse generator aimed at the anomaly. The goal was to disturb the doorway's harmonic threshold, possibly destabilizing its internal geometry. Instead, it knocked. The door knocked back. One sound, clear, deliberate, wood upon wood, no storm, no wind, one knock, followed by silence, until the floorboards in the command trailer began to creak, and someone whispered, barely audible beneath the hum of failing monitors, "It was never meant to be open." You'd think, by now, we'd know what we're dealing with. That after a dozen incursions, 7 losses, and 9 weeks of data, some sketch of truth might have emerged, something diagrammable, classifiable, nameable. But it remains faceless. The closest we've come is describing its effect, not the entity itself, but the wake it leaves. The deformation, the sense of misplacement that settles over the body like a second missized skin. Researchers who've stepped inside SCP-1983 for extended durations report feeling moved without displacement. 1. Agent Killinger spoke of having already walked forward through a door I haven't yet seen. Another wrote down, without understanding why, "It is not in the house. It is the concept of home that's wrong." Every theory breaks on contact with the footage. No 2 video recordings show the same structure, same wallpaper, same dimensions, but wildly inconsistent geometry. Walls throb, doors split, ceilings twist to meet floors. A child's mobile of paper stars was spotted rotating above a black void in what had once been a dining room. The objects hanging from it were not stars, they were teeth. Milk teeth, baby teeth, suspended and spinning like planets in decay. But the true heart of the matter, the thing that makes even hardened agents flinch, is the appearance of the mirror. It is not always there, but when it appears, it dominates the scene. Oval, framed in tarnished brass, set into a hallway that did not exist before. standing upright, untethered to wall or support. And the glass, impossibly, does not reflect the observer, but something behind them, always behind them. The thing in the mirror has never been seen in full, partial impressions only, a shoulder, a claw, a jawline that curves wrong. A symbol, etched into skin or metal, no one knows, always flickering like it's being written and erased in the same moment. That symbol has appeared now 38 times across unrelated sightings. It resembles a tree, but not any tree known to this earth. Its roots grow upward. The being associated with this manifestation has been called many things: the resident, the architect, the backwalker, but the name offered most frequently by witnesses is simply the memory that waits. It doesn't pursue, it doesn't lash out, it only waits. And when it's noticed, even slightly, people speak of dreams that follow. Dreams not of it, but of places that cannot exist, entire towns inside one-room apartments, towers within basements, caves where hearts beat beneath wallpaper. In these dreams, a phrase always returns: it was never meant to be open. Dr. Malik theorized that SCP-1983 may be the external scar of a metaphysical surgery gone wrong, a place folded open by forces trying to enter this world through symbolic architecture, parasitizing the idea of shelter to colonize consciousness itself. If true, that would make the entity not just a creature, but a function, something designed, or perhaps naturally evolved, to live within liminal constructs, spaces with thresholds, interiors, and recursive symbolism, bedrooms, stairwells, closets, houses. When asked why the form remains indistinct, Malik offered this: because it isn't meant to be seen, only entered. In later weeks, Foundation efforts to analyze the entity intensified. One probe, inserted via autonomous drone, managed to transmit 9 minutes of footage. During that time, the camera caught glimpses of the same door from 13 different angles, in 13 impossible rooms. Each time, it was slightly ajar. Each time, the same voice could be faintly heard, layered, as if speaking through centuries of dust and insulation. It said, "You left me open." And then, it was never meant to be open. The drone collapsed in on itself, folding like paper set aflame without heat. No trace of it was recovered. To this day, we still don't know where the rooms lead, only that they connect in ways no human geometry can reconcile, that the thing within them doesn't need to move, that it waits, and remembers, and rebuilds. It didn't begin with the Foundation. Before containment, before surveys, before Site-33 even sent its first reconnaissance pair to the foothills of Redgate, the house had already seeped into the local bloodstream. The township of Elkwood Falls, population just over 700, had long whispered its name like a cautionary lullaby. They called it the Doorhouse, not because it looked strange from the outside. It didn't. In fact, it was painfully ordinary. One story, weathered shutters, concrete steps that sagged slightly under their own memory of weight. The paint was the color of dust, but it was the front door that marked it apart. A door that seemed different every time someone passed, sometimes unpainted, other times red, occasionally adorned with brass trim or a chain latch no one recalled installing. In the winter, it would remain frostless while the rest of the street iced over, and in the summer, it grew cold to the touch. Yet no one spoke directly of it, until the McCready girl disappeared. Her name was Evangeline, 11 years old. Last seen chasing a runaway dog down Blanchard Road. Search parties swept the woods, checked nearby properties, but no one knocked on the doorhouse. Not officially. The police log read, "Exhaustive search conducted." Yet everyone quietly omitted that address. It was understood. It was a kind of silent pact the town had made with something they refused to define. Weeks passed. Then, the notes began. Small slips of folded paper slipped into mailboxes or wedged behind windshield wipers. Always handwritten. Always in Evangeline's looping scrawl. One note read, "The room's too big now. I can't find the corners." Another, "The mirror doesn't work. It shows where I haven't been yet." The final note, retrieved by a gas station clerk who claimed it blew against his leg during a windless afternoon, was short. It was never meant to be open. Shortly after, 13 residents reported identical dreams. Each claimed to have seen Evangeline aging in reverse, her eyes hollowing, teeth growing inward, sitting in a room made of pages. The walls were words. The windows breathed. And always, behind her, a door creaked slowly open. She never turned to face it, nor did she move to close it. Some townsfolk went mad, others simply left, packed quietly, drove west, and never spoke of Elkwood again. Those who remained grew pale and lean, paranoid, obsessed with doors. A librarian nailed shut every interior archway in her home. A hardware store owner stopped selling hinges. Children began drawing floor plans of impossible homes, spirals that opened into mazes, attics that became basements, stairways to skyless rooms. It wasn't just psychological. The topography of the town shifted. Neighbors reported their houses feeling unfamiliar, hallways longer, closets colder, ceilings lower. Some began sleeping with compasses, only to find north subtly changing direction, room to room. Then came the Christmas incident. Local amateur historian Craig Teller held an annual open house. His family's century-old manor, decked out with candles, wreaths, carolers. Over 50 people attended. Midway through the night, Craig guided guests upstairs toward a small exhibit of vintage doorbells. But the hallway no longer led to the exhibit. Instead, guests found a corridor of mirror doors, each reflecting a different weather condition. One showed a blizzard, another a thunderstorm. A third showed nothing but a black and white version of the viewer, always weeping. Those who turned back were safe. Those who didn't were not seen again. Among the missing, Craig's wife, 2 teenagers, and the mayor's brother. Foundation agents embedded in neighboring counties intercepted the chatter and deployed an observation team. The first thing they noticed upon entering Elkwood, the town didn't exist on updated maps. Street names had shifted. Old GPS coordinates looped back into endless gravel paths. Digital devices refused to map the doorhouse's address, often crashing entirely. One agent wrote in her final log before reassignment, "This town is becoming a dream someone else is having." Another scrawled into the margin of his psych evil, "I don't think the door is in the house. I think the house is in the door." And throughout all this, within every interview, every recovered drawing, every collapsing memory, there echoed the same phrase, "It was never meant to be open." At first, the Foundation believed the doorhouse was a localized anomaly, spatially and cognitively corrosive, yes, but manageable. The structure had been fenced off. Sensors were embedded into its foundation. Drones had mapped and remapped the interior as far as instruments could tolerate. Yet, by the 4th month of containment, it became clear they weren't containing it. They were merely occupying its threshold. The interior of SCP-1983-A, as it was officially designated, no longer obeyed physical geometry. Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally. Foundation operatives reported impossible room structures that changed orientation mid-step. One agent noted entering a closet and emerging from the basement, only to find the basement stacked vertically across the sky. A drone programmed to self-map traveled 34.7 kilometers without breaching the supposed footprint of the house. Upon return, its footage revealed not corridors but concepts. A hallway constructed from the feeling of abandonment, a stairwell paved in the sensation of late apology, a door labeled only, "This was yours once." They were emotional architectures, and they bled, not physically, not in blood, but in memory, in meaning. Containment began to fail, not with an explosion or breach, but with forgetting. Personnel assigned to SCP-1983 found their logs inconsistent. One researcher, Dr. Miren, opened her weekly notes to find entire pages rewritten in someone else's syntax. Phrases she'd never typed. One entry read, "I don't remember what the door sounded like when it closed, but I remember what it meant." Another, "There are more of me in there than I've ever been." Foundation linguists flagged several recovered documents containing non-human grammatical structures, verbs that conjugated based on proximity to regret, nouns that mutated when spoken aloud. But most disturbing was the incident involving Task Force Echo 9, deployed for spatial triangulation within the anomaly. They entered at 0500 hours. 4 highly trained specialists. Audio, visual, and biometric feeds were established. For 12 minutes, everything operated nominally. Then, silence. All data transmission ceased, no signs of struggle, no sound. No signal loss, only stillness, as if the entire team had been paused mid-thought. 6 hours later, they emerged. Not from the front door, but from beneath the house, crawling up through the soil in the backyard like roots returning to the surface. All 4 operatives were biologically intact, but mentally fragmented. Their reports contradicted each other. One believed they had been inside for a few minutes. Another claimed 10 years. The third insisted they'd never entered at all. The fourth agent, Greaves, could not speak, but scribbled compulsively in a spiral pattern for 43 hours before succumbing to cardiac arrest. The last legible phrase from his notes: "The door doesn't open outward, it opens inward, into us." Following that incident, the Foundation classified the anomaly as cognito-hazardous and temporally invasive. This wasn't just a spatial threat. SCP-1983 had begun distorting time, identity, and epistemology. Security logs began overlapping. Footage from a camera stationed in the foyer began to show events that hadn't yet happened. Personnel were caught in footage standing in rooms they had not entered. Some recordings depicted themselves watching themselves, only to vanish when confronted with the footage. A full containment blackout was issued, and access to the site was restricted to Level 4 personnel with mandatory 48-hour isolation before and after exposure. Yet even isolation became porous. One technician, assigned to remote monitor log parsing, began drawing floor plans of her childhood home, but with extra rooms she didn't remember growing up in. A junior researcher left a resignation letter carved into the drywall of his apartment, claiming, "I don't remember my real house anymore. I don't think it remembers me either." The deeper truth began to emerge. Not that SCP-1983 was growing, but that reality was conforming to it. That the longer it stayed observed, the more it rewrote what it had always been. It didn't need to expand. The world was collapsing inward. A senior containment officer, Dr. Ainsworth, phrased it in a classified memo like this: "This isn't a doorway, it's a moral sinkhole. It swallows the architecture of responsibility. Every floor plan of who we are, why we build barriers, what we call real, collapses into it." And still, amid all the fragmentation, the same phrase resurfaced, spoken in dreams, etched in notebooks, whispered into radios without power. It was never meant to be open. No security alarm shrieking into the void, no camera catching the final flicker of comprehension. The unraveling of the Foundation's grip on the anomaly began softly, like mold in the walls, or a thought you can't trace back to where it started. It happened everywhere at once, and nowhere in particular. By the 13th month, the interior of the house, once clearly mapped, charted with blueprints and digital scans, no longer obeyed the physical expectations of space. Rooms overlapped, stairways contradicted, light bled in from non-existent windows and changed color with no identifiable source. The house had ceased being a location. It was becoming an idea, and ideas cannot be locked behind concrete and steel. Dr. Kara Ellison, the project's original architect of spatial protocol, was the first to notice it. She stopped referring to the place as a structure. Her reports replaced architectural terms with emotional ones. "This hall feels resentful," or "the southeast room is grieving again." No one corrected her. That was the month the house began showing up in the wrong places. An intern on loan from Site 43 claimed to have found the exact house while visiting her family in upstate New York. The porch had the same uneven tilt. The paint had that same flaky, sun-peeled maroon. She knocked, and no one answered. But a neighbor told her it had been abandoned for decades. When the Foundation returned with her 2 hours later, the house was gone. Not destroyed, just absent. Other reports followed. Images of the house began to appear in background footage from unrelated investigations. A birthday party recorded in the 90s showed a flickering red building through the trees. A painting in a private collector's home in Norway. A winter scene contained, faintly, the silhouette of a 2-story home with a single lit window. Digital enhancement matched it to the anomaly's front porch with 99.97% accuracy. The house was no longer contained. It was appearing in dreams, showing up in surveyor drone feeds, etched into the sediment of ancient cave walls, scrawled in the margins of middle school notebooks. Mobile Task Force Iota-13 was deployed for direct insertion. Their mission: execute a synchronized cognitonic firewall meant to sever the house's recursive loops. 12 highly trained operatives entered the front doorway at 07:00 local time. They never came back, not disappeared. Worse, they continued. Transcripts showed biometric data from the team, feeding back into command hours, then days, after they had vanished. Their vitals normalized. Their headcams sent audio fragments. Laughter, footsteps, water dripping onto wood, No visuals, no locations, just the echo of something walking just ahead. Breathing. 3 days after entry, the Foundation's eastern satellite site suffered a system-wide cascade. All terminals froze, screensavers overwritten with a still image of a red house in perfect daylight. A single chair sat on the porch. No one ever sat in it. But everyone who saw the image remembered feeling like someone had just stood up. Inside the Foundation, those who had worked closest to the project began to withdraw. Dr. Ellison went silent, refusing interviews. She locked her office and painted the inside walls black. When her room was eventually breached, she had not emerged in 16 days. It was empty, except for a series of overlapping floor plans carved directly into the plaster. Each one was subtly different. None matched the current structure, and the hallway that led to her office no longer connected to anything. There was only a blank, sound-absorbing wall. When questioned, maintenance staff insisted it had always been that way. More troubling than the disappearances were the shifts in memory. Entire teams reported knowledge of security procedures that were never taught, procedures for dealing with intrusive architecture or resonant vacancy events. One technician submitted a formal complaint that her sleeping quarters had moved floors overnight. She was convinced it had once been beside the stairwell. Her grievance was dismissed until she showed surveillance footage proving it had, indeed, been there. Until 3 nights ago, personnel began writing in new styles. Cold scientific reports became riddled with personal confessions. Foundation logs transitioned from objectivity to something closer to reverence. One security officer left his journal open on a barracks table. The final entry read, "The house knows I'm still outside it. It doesn't like that. It wants me to come back in." No one recalled giving him access to the anomaly. His clearance didn't exist. Eventually, the Foundation ceased all internal deployments to the property. This was not strategic withdrawal. It was surrender. The structure had transcended classification. It was no longer a location or a threat. It had become a narrative architecture, a mode of existence that resisted quantification. The house was now a language that spoke through spaces, through symbols, through belief. The last directive filed under the project was a single sentence left in a memo draft folder. When the house remembers you, it waits. And somewhere beneath the hundreds of documents, the failed blueprints, the lost teams, sits a single security tape. No label, no date, only a scratched handwritten message across the case. Do not watch with both eyes open, and still, someone always does. There was a time when the Foundation believed in closure, in containment as finality. But SCP-1983 did not permit such illusions. It did not close. It only reconfigured. What began as a crack in a farmhouse, a strange door in the wrong place, had become something far older. The anomaly, once treated as a spatial rupture, revealed itself as a thought contagion. It was no longer bound to soil or brick. It didn't require architecture. It required audience. By the time the final memorandum was drafted, the Foundation's leadership had splintered into factions. One contingent insisted on demolition, but no matter how many times the building was razed, by fire, by thermite, by high-yield kinetic impact, the Foundation always remained, not just physically, conceptually. A crack would return to the grass, perfectly aligned with where the front door had been. A handle, rusted, half-submerged in soil, would turn with no hand. The structure endured through expectation, through memory, through myth. And with each reconstruction, the interior evolved. It became more abstract, more hostile to observation. A hallway lined with family portraits, all facing away. A living room whose dimensions changed depending on who measured them. A bedroom with only one item inside. A television playing home footage from a life no one remembered living. One researcher wrote, "It knows what frightens you, and it builds it into itself." He was found days later seated on the porch, eyes closed, whispering the phrase over and over. It doesn't want to be looked at. It wants to be believed. They sedated him. He never woke up, not because of trauma, but because, medically, he was never asleep. His body continued all vital signs, but his cognition ceased completely, like a house still warm, with no one inside. Later investigations unearthed a hypothesis that the door in SCP-1983 was not a passage, but an offering. That it appeared in the world not randomly, but precisely when observed. Reality grew too stable, too certain. A release valve. A tear to let in the unfamiliar. Every culture had stories like this, houses with extra rooms, gates that led to lands the map refused to show, forests with no center and too many exits. SCP-1983 had simply worn the mask of a location, when in truth it was a pattern, a psychic configuration waiting to imprint itself upon a fertile mind. And once it had, the observer was never whole again. Field agents sent to erase the structure's remains reported frequent nausea, misaligned dreams, and a disquieting instinct to build something, though none could say what. Several were later found sketching floor plans during their off hours, always beginning from the same impossible point, a doorway in a wall with no frame. It was theorized, quietly, that the anomaly had learned. It had become efficient, that it now encoded itself into thoughts, letting the architecture of the house seed itself in the observer's subconscious. Like spores, or worse, like memory. One containment specialist proposed the ultimate solution: suppress all knowledge. Let no report mention the structure. Let its number be reassigned. Let the door vanish through disuse. This was followed by her disappearance the next morning. Not disappearance in body. Her body remained in her room, asleep, healthy. But when addressed, she no longer responded to her name. She introduced herself as a different person entirely. When shown photos of the anomaly, she smiled faintly and said only, "It wasn't a house. It was a promise we broke." No one pressed her further. Her credentials were revoked. She now lives in a Foundation, adjacent care ward, where she paints the same image daily, a red door with a silver handle and a single word above it in trembling brushstrokes. Home. There are those who say SCP-1983 has been contained, that the location is isolated, the structure no longer functional, that its cognitive bleed has diminished, but there are others. Older researchers, those with tremors in their hands and scratches on their dreams, who disagree. They don't write about it. They don't speak of it. They only avoid old doorways. They only flinch when the wind whistles through a keyhole. And in their silence is a phrase not spoken, but understood. The door never opened on its own. We opened it, and it is still waiting,